I'd like to ask all of you women a question. What would you do with a $20,000 bottle of perfume? How would you handle a $20,000 bottle of perfume? You'd probably be afraid to, wouldn't you? And where would you store it? In a safe? Would you put it in a secret compartment in the back of your closet? You probably up your homeowner's insurance. But here's the big question. Is there any man in your life so special that you would pour it all out for him in one night? We come now to one of the most touching, beautiful, and yet controversial scenes in all the Gospels. Jesus is a guest at a dinner in his honor at the home of a man named Simon in the town of Bethany. And the guest list includes his disciples, his friend Lazarus, and Lazarus' sisters, Martha and Mary. Let's see what unfolds at this dinner party that we read about in John's Gospel, the 12th chapter, verses 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. So the evening is in full swing. There's animated conversation that is punctuated by the clink of pottery and the sound of laughter. When Mary gets up from her place, she circles the table, and coming to stand in front of Jesus, she drops to her knees. She reaches for the alabaster flask that is hanging from her neck, and she breaks the long, narrow neck of that flask, and she empties the contents out onto his feet. Within seconds, people around the table are elbowing each other. They're sniffing the air. That's nard. That is pure nard. Holy criminy, that is nard. Nard was a French perfume of the first century. It was prohibitively expensive. It was, you might say, the ultimate luxury item. But here's the thing. It was not unusual to bring perfume to a banquet. In that day, in fact, that's what perfume was for. You would fill festive places with clouds of sweet-smelling aroma. Now, why was that? How do I say this delicately? This was the day before running water and baths, and it was a hot, sweaty climate. People stank. I looked it up. That's how it stank. It's not stunk. People smelled bad. And so on special occasions, you would break out the Chanel No. 5, and the host or hostess would dab a drop or two on your head as you entered into the banquet, sort of an early precursor to splashing on the aftershave. And so on super special occasions, surrounding you would be this wonderful fragrance. And so Mary brought her perfume. And so it would seem to be very classy. It's what she did with that perfume that brought down the house around her. And in fact, in Mark's gospel, it says it wasn't just Judas, but it was everyone in that room. It says, rebuked her harshly. And in Greek, the word for rebuked harshly means to roar in anger. Well, for heaven's sakes, what did this girl do to make this whole room yell at her? The answer is she did 4 things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. She did 4 things. The first thing that she did is she broke the jar. In Mark's gospel, it says she didn't just pour out the contents, she broke the jar. The entire pint of precious nard went kapoosh like this into a puddle on the floor all at once. And in less Martha and Mary and Lazarus were incredibly wealthy. That was the most expensive thing they owned. It says in verse 3, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Mark even points out that it was a flask made of alabaster, which probably means that it was a priceless heirloom that was being passed down through the family, and it just, boom, it was over with. In other words, Mary blows their entire family financial security in one moment. The family nest egg just goes poof on the puddle on the floor, just like that. When they first saw Mary bring in her perfume, they thought, oh, how sweet. And now they're appalled. And of course, Judas now hits the ceiling. He says, what do you got for brains, lady? That was an entire year's salary down the drain. But you know what I think? I think Mary probably just smiled because she knew that Judas had never been in love. And if you've ever been in love, you understand this perfectly because love goes overboard. It was Pascal who said, when one does not love too much, one loves too little. People in love, they cry and they dance and they buy new wardrobes and they change their hairstyles every 2 weeks. You say to your teenager, hey, listen, don't blow your whole life savings on this date with this girl. You don't have to take her to Bacchanalia. Why not take her to Ted's Montana Grill? Use your head, be reasonable. It was Pascal who also said, the heart has its reasons that reason knows nothing of. But you know what I think? I think it was not the money quite so much that upset Judas and the others. I think it was what my daughters call a PDA. PDA? A public display of affection. What Mary did was probably just as shocking back then as it would have been if she'd done it last night at a Buckhead dinner party. It was a sudden, shocking, public display of affection. And I don't know about you, but I think if you're honest, I think all of us are sort of creeped out when we see PDAs, public, shocking, sudden displays of affection. As a matter of fact, I've had a little crusade in my ministry. I don't quite know how to express this, but let's just say to tone down what happens at weddings at the end when I say to them, you may now kiss the bride. I always encourage them to make it a nice little Presbyterian kiss, decent and in order. None of those sloppy agape stuff. But do you think they listen to me? No. In fact, I could write a book about the things that have happened about that far from my face. How do they hold their breath that long? I don't know. I've seen mothers cover the eyes of their children out in the congregation. And so what I do now is I coach them. I say, now listen, it doesn't have to be as if it's your first kiss, but it shouldn't be as if it's going to be your last kiss either. But do you think that's if I'm fighting a losing battle? Because you see, it's just the nature of love to go overboard. In my last congregation in Houston, we had an elder who has a daughter who in her late 30s finally got engaged, and he was so thrilled and loved his daughter so much that this elder flew in a 300-pound wedding cake from California. And I'll never forget, I was there when it arrived in the church parking lot in a truck, and we had to use a forklift to get the cake out of the truck to bring it into the fellowship hall. And his wife said, Luther, we only have 600 guests. That's a half a pound of wedding cake for every one of the guests. He said, and our church freezer was filled with frozen wedding cake for the next several months because a father's love went overboard. But come to think of it, didn't our Heavenly Father's love go overboard when He created the world? Think about this for a moment. We probably would have just loved flowers, even if God had made flowers the same way that Henry Ford made automobiles, so they're all alike and they're all the same color. Imagine for a moment if all we had was your one stripped down model of a generic flower, say a yellow daffodil. And we probably still say, wow, flowers are beautiful. Oh, we love flowers. But God is love, and love goes overboard. And so we don't just have yellow daffodils. We have camellias and azaleas and rhododendrons and roses and poppies and irises and electric blue hydrangeas. And we have Callaway Gardens in the springtime. We have the superabundance of a God who just goes overboard. I don't think I have to tell you how much God went overboard when He made this wonderful city of Atlanta. Is there any other city you can think of that has more beautiful neighborhoods than we do? One of the stories that you may have heard me tell, I love to tell it so much, was when I first arrived here in Atlanta, I worked on a habitat home in a poor neighborhood in South Atlanta, and we had just framed out the habitat home, and I could see that there was a picture window, and I wondered, what is their view going to look like? And so I went inside and I squatted down and I looked out through what would be their view, and it turned out there wasn't a house across the street. There were just these 80-foot hardwood trees shooting up into the sky, perfectly framing the gold dome of the Capitol. And I thought, wow, in most cities you pay extra $250,000 just to have that view. But here in Atlanta, we have so many of those views that even a poor family in South Atlanta could have $1 million view. I said that, I think it's probably good that the Pilgrims landed off the coast of Massachusetts, because if the Pilgrims had wandered south and made landfall off the coast of Georgia, to this day, the interior of America probably would be unexplored. Because who in their right mind would ever leave this place where God has so poured out his blessing? God is love, and love goes overboard. At the wedding in Cana of Galilee, Jesus, when he turned water into wine, might have prudently made enough wine so that everybody would have a half a glass to have a nice toast, but not so much that things might get out of hand. But John just delights in telling us that for that couple, Jesus turned water into 180 gallons of fine wine. When the prodigal son came home, that father might have prudently shaken his son's hand and said, "Son, we'll talk next week." But instead, the word goes out, and there is this wild, huge, expensive party. And at midnight, that father is seen swinging from the chandeliers, because love goes overboard. Judas is right. Mary's act did not feed any poor people. It didn't house any homeless people. And today, the church, including this church, continues to be guilty of lavish wastefulness in the worship of our Lord. We pour out expensive perfume and making big, impressive buildings and gorgeous windows. And on Sundays, we come down here dressed up like lovers going out on a date. We're surrounded by even fresh flowers as we praise our beloved to the sky. Worship is our way of being in love with God. At times, it makes no sense to be sensible. In fact, the truly strange behavior in that room was not Mary. It was the people who stayed in their seats and didn't come and kneel at the feet of Jesus, because love goes overboard. That's the first thing that she did. She went overboard. And then there's Judas. He looks at this and he says, "Oh, what a waste. All of that money, it should have gone to the food bank." You know what Judas is doing? He's simply showboating his social conscience here, which is something that's very popular for people to do today. And very often secular people who have no use for God or religion will say, "Why are you wasting all that money on churches and religion when you aren't meeting the real needs of people?" And the real needs of people are for housing and for food and for health care and for education, and give them self-esteem seminars so they feel good about themselves and make them feel successful, because those material needs are the ones that are the real needs that people have. But when I hear people say that, it reminds me of something that happened years ago during the heyday of Michael Jordan's career. I remember, never forget, one night watching Michael win one of his 6th NBA championships, and this was the one that he won just 3 short years after the tragic death of his father. You may recall Michael Jordan's dad was murdered while sitting napping in his car at a rest stop in North Carolina. After that, the next time that Michael won an NBA championship, that night the buzzer went off, and the crush of reporters followed the Chicago Bulls as they went running back into their locker room. They were going to interview them during the celebration, only they went running into the locker room, and what the reporters saw was over in the corner was Michael Jordan. He was face down, and he was sobbing. Here was the most famous basketball player in the history of the world, and he was sobbing unconsolably, and he was cradling an orange basketball in his arms. And they didn't know whether to say something to him or to leave him alone, but everybody in the room knew exactly why that was happening, because that day was Father's Day. And here he was at the top of his game. He was at the top of his world. His dreams had all come true, but none of it amounted to anything because he didn't have a father in the room to put his arms around him and to say, "Son, I'm proud of you." And to me, in many ways, that's almost a kind of metaphor for our secular world today. I think many of us know friends who are at the top of their game. They've got all their dreams have come true. They have everything this world could ever want, but somehow still there's an unnamed emptiness, and they may not realize it. It's because they don't have that father in the room who's there to share with them that joy. For Mary, having Jesus in the room was everything, and so she poured out all she had. She gave all she had. That's the first thing she did. The second amazing thing that Mary does is she pours it on Jesus' feet. In that day, perfume belonged on your head. In fact, the most demeaning and humiliating thing you could do to yourself was to touch someone else's feet. I don't know if you realize it, but American slavery in the United States was far crueler than ancient slavery. In ancient Israel, Jewish slaves had rights. And one of the things the rabbi said was, you must never require your slave to unlatch your shoes, because not even a slave should be required to touch your feet. Now, the slave would bring you the basin, the slave would bring you the water, the slave would bring you the towel, but you washed your own feet. Here's Mary down on her knees washing Jesus' feet. What is Mary saying? She's saying, Lord, there's nothing you can ask me to do that I won't do for you. When Mary gives her the perfume, what Mary says is, Lord, I give you my all. I give you all I have. But now she's saying, Lord, I give you all that I am. I give you all of me. Not 10%, not a tithe, not 50%, not 99%. I give you all I am. Every cell of my body, every synapse of my brain, every nanosecond of my time, every drop of my perfume, every heirloom in my closet, from the tippy top of my head to the bottom of my toes, all of me belongs to all of you. My wife Becky and I have a song that we really love by John Legend, and it's called All of Me. All of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I'll give my all to you. You are my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning, because I give you all of me and you give me all of you. Mary is saying, Jesus, I give you all of me. Maybe you're a person who's very generous and you give Jesus a lot of what you have. What Jesus wants from you this morning, though, is that you give him all that you are. Yes, even your imperfection. And he says, give your all to me. Why? Because I give my all to you. And friends, this now is the key that unlocks the mystery of this entire story. And that is, Mary does now a third thing that is absolutely amazing. And the third thing that she does, she pours out all that she has. You know what she does is she sees something that nobody in that room can see. Mary connects the dot. And that is why Mary lives out this kind of silent pantomime of a love song to Jesus, in which she says, I give my all to you because I can now see that you're about to give your all for me. In other words, what Mary sees is the cross. She connects the dots. If you turn over the next page, the next day is Palm Sunday, and Mary gets it. Jesus is about to die. And if you were going to spend the last night on earth with the person you love most in the world, what would you hold back? You'd hold back nothing. And knowing that Jesus is about to give her his all for her, she now goes and gets the most priceless thing that she owns, and she pours it out for him. Knowing that she is loved beyond measure, she gives beyond bound. This morning, I want to ask you to think about where you are with God for a moment. Have you lost a kind of tingle in your worship before God? Could it be that you're somebody who's holding back like the other people there in the room that night? Could it feel a little bit like you're going through the motions and a kind of trapped in the wrappings, stiff sort of churchianity? Let me tell you, the answer is not to try harder. It's not to pray more. It's not even to give more. It's to do what Mary did. Mary simply mirrors back to Jesus what she sees Jesus is about to do for her. This morning, give your all to the one that you know has given his all for you. And that brings back that joy. And there's more. There's one more thing. There's a fourth thing that Mary does. And this is the most astonishing thing of all. What Mary does is Mary lets down her hair. Mary reaches up and she undoes the tresses of her hair, and so that her hair now cascades down about her shoulders. And with that hair, she wipes Jesus' feet. Do you see the scandal here? This is where they all yell at her. The rabbi said that if a married woman were to loosen her hair in public, that was grounds for divorce. This was a shocking public act of intimacy by Mary. Timothy Keller says it's possible for her to have given Jesus all she had, that perfume, and still hold back her heart. It was possible to say to Jesus, I surrender my will to you, and I'll do whatever you ask me to do, and still hold back her heart. But what Mary is doing here, she is saying, not only do I give you all that I have, not only do I give you all that I am, I'm going to love every minute of that. I'm going to let down my hair. Now, where was it legal for a woman to let down her hair in those days? One place, in her family, with her loved one, in her home. Who are the people around whom you let down your hair? The people around whom you can totally be yourself. See, Jesus wants to be one of those people in your life. He wants you to let your hair down around him. He wants to share those private corners of your world. He wants you to let him in on your worries and your struggles and your sorrows and your joys. He wants to have coffee with you tomorrow morning. He wants you to check in with him through the day. Ellen Cherry is a professor of theology at Princeton Seminary, and she was not a believer for a long time. She was a social worker. And one day she decided she wanted to get a philosophical underpinning for her social work, so she took a religion class at Temple University, and there got introduced to the writings of Karl Barth, the great theologian. And she said it was Karl Barth who taught her that God is more than just an idea, that God's a reality. And she just says that before she was a believer, one night she was watching TV with her husband, and they were watching a movie called The Milagro Beanfield War. And there was a migrant who was standing out in a field, and he had a picture of Jesus on his T-shirt. And her husband said, boy, isn't that demeaning? This guy's got God on his T-shirt. And Ellen Cherry said, no, you don't understand. These Christians, they have God close to them. They have God down in the nitty-gritty. They even have God on the mud flaps of their truck. And she said, boy, that was what was most awesome, the mud flaps of the truck. This morning, God wants you to let your hair down with him. He wants you to let him close. He wants to share those intimate corners of your life. Yeah, he'll even let you put his picture on your T-shirt and maybe even on your mud flap. And so this morning, go overboard. Give all of you to all of him. See the cross before you. And yes, don't forget, most of all, to let down your hair.